My girlfriend's ex gave her roses and invited her out, and she accepted. In the middle of our special date night and said, "Don't be dramatic. We're just friends." I packed her clothes and kicked her out, and I said, "You no longer have a home to return to." Replaying the situation over and over in my mind, the anger began to consume me. I imagined Jorge, her ex, laughing at me, thinking he still had power over Paula, and Paula, either naive or interested, going along with it. Then I made a decision that seemed completely justified at the time. If she preferred to spend her birthday with him, she had nothing left to come back for in our home. I took all her clothes, shoes, and belongings, put them in bags, and drove to the restaurant where I knew they would be. I parked right in front of the entrance and took a deep breath before going in. When I arrived, I saw them sitting together, laughing as if nothing in the world was wrong. I approached the table with the bags and, without saying a word, placed them in front of them. "Here you go, Paula. This is all that's left of our relationship. Don't come back to my house," I said, trying to maintain my composure as everyone in the restaurant watched in amazement. Paula looked at me in disbelief, while Jorge shifted uncomfortably in his seat. The entire restaurant was silent, everyone waiting to see what would happen next. That's when tears started streaming down Paula's cheeks, but I didn't feel sorry. I felt a deep satisfaction seeing everything she had tried to build that day crumble. However, just when I thought the situation couldn't get any tenser, Paula abruptly stood up from the table and grabbed my arm, trying to drag me to a corner of the restaurant. The entire place seemed to hold its breath as she struggled to keep her composure. "Please, don't do this here," she begged, a mix of desperation and anger in her eyes. "Why not, Paula? Did you think this wouldn't have consequences?" I replied, my voice trembling with fury, but before I could say anything else, a waiter who had been watching everything from a distance began to approach us with a tense expression on his face. What was he going to do? Intervene? Call the police? At that moment, the air in the restaurant became heavy, as if charged with electricity. Something was about to explode. Paula abruptly stood up from the table and grabbed my arm, trying to pull me away from everyone's gaze. "You're crazy. This isn't what it seems," she whispered, trying to hide her desperation. "What isn't what it seems, Paula? That you prefer to spend your birthday with your ex instead of with your boyfriend?" I replied, unable to contain my anger. "Please, let's talk at home. Don't make a scene," she begged, looking around embarrassed. "There's nothing to talk about, Paula. You no longer have a home to return to. You made your decision, and I made mine," I responded with a coldness I didn't even know I had inside. Meanwhile, the waiter who had been watching from a distance began to approach, visibly nervous. He was a young man, probably no older than 20, and although he tried to remain professional, it was clear that the tension in the room was overwhelming him. "Excuse me, folks, but we're going to have to ask you to either calm down or resolve this outside," he said with a trembling voice, not really knowing how to handle the situation. Paula, with tears in her eyes, looked at him pleadingly. "I'm sorry, we just need one more moment, please. We don't want to cause any trouble," she said, trying to sound convincing. The waiter, uncomfortable, looked around and noticed that all the diners were still paying attention to the drama unfolding before them. He seemed torn between insisting or letting it go. "Please, it's all over now," I intervened, determined to close this chapter once and for all. "Paula, there's nothing more to discuss. Don't try to make me feel guilty for something you caused." The waiter finally stepped back, visibly relieved, but the atmosphere was still charged. Paula began to sob, drawing even more attention from the diners. Her ex, Jorge, who had been silent the entire time, finally spoke up. "Look, I didn't mean to cause trouble. It was just a friendly invitation. There's no need to take this so far," he said, trying to calm the situation, but his tone was so distant that it was clear he no longer wanted to be involved. "Don't worry, Jorge, there are no more problems between us. She has nowhere else to go, so I'm leaving her to you," I said with a bitter smile, making it clear that she was now his responsibility. The waiter continued watching from a distance, unsure whether to intervene again or not. Meanwhile, Jorge remained silent, unable to respond. I turned to leave, but Paula grabbed me tightly. "Don't leave me like this, please, let's talk," she begged, tears streaming down her face. But I had already made my decision. I gently let go of her and walked away, feeling her gaze piercing my back. There was no turning back. As I left the restaurant, I heard Jorge trying to calm her down, but the damage was already done. However, as I reached the restaurant door, the young waiter rushed to catch up with me. "Sir, excuse me, I know it's not my place, but are you sure about what you're doing?" he asked with a mix of concern and curiosity in his eyes. I looked at him for a moment, surprised by his boldness. He didn't know the whole story, didn't know what I had gone through in the past few hours, but somehow, his intervention made me reflect for a brief moment. "Believe me, I am," I finally replied, without stopping to walk. The waiter stood still, watching me as I walked away. Maybe he had seen more than I thought. Maybe he had been in a similar situation. But at that moment, none of that mattered. The only thing I knew for sure was that I wasn't going to back down. I went home with a mix of emotions. Part of me felt liberated, as if I had regained control that I felt I had lost. But another part of me wondered if I had been too harsh. However, the thought that she had chosen to spend her birthday with another man, and not just any man, but her ex, made me feel like I had done the right thing. That night, I received several calls and messages from Paula, but I ignored them all. I didn't want to hear from her, not after what she had done. But the next day, something unexpected happened. Jorge had left her alone at the restaurant. From what I found out later, after I left, Jorge simply got up and left, leaving Paula crying alone at the table. Not only had she lost me, but she was also left alone without the support of the person she thought was her friend. Paula ended up spending the night at a friend's house because she had nowhere else to go. In the end, she lost everything because of an impulsive and selfish decision. And I, though hurt, knew it was for the best. I had regained my dignity and rid myself of someone who didn't value what we had. Since then, I haven't heard from her again. Maybe she tried to move on. Maybe she tried to reconnect with Jorge, or maybe with another friend. But the truth is, I don't care. The only thing that matters to me now is that I've learned to value myself above all else, and I won't allow anyone to trample on who I'm ever